Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our interview tonight with Rep. Jeanne Kapela. HULI PAC was birthed from a shared drive to rework our system by seeking āina-based focused leadership for our Hawai'i Island community. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are willing to circle back to our roots and instill real change in our community, from Kona to Ka'u to Hilo to Hawi. The time is now to HULI the system. Conducting our interviews tonight are Cindy Punahale and Michaela Okuchi. I'd like to introduce Rep. Jeanne Kapela from House District 5. Why don't you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for welcoming us in. And thank you so much to everyone on Facebook land and whoever decides to watch this later on. And thank you to everyone here sharing the screen with me, sharing this space with me. It's such a privilege to be able to join you folks. And I think your introduction of the time is now to HULI the system is so relevant, so necessary, and so needed. My name is Jeanne Kapela. I represent District 5, which currently runs from about Lako Street to just past Na'alehu. The new District 5 is now going to run from about Captain Cook all the way to Kayau. So a big chunk of the southern half of the district, or the southern half of the island. And I'm excited to get to know a whole new area a lot better, and to be able to bring some of these voices in. I think that have felt so marginalized for a really long period of time. My district already is very rural. It includes Ocean View and Na'alehu, areas of people that have, I think, for so long been pushed aside, been marginalized, and by the system felt forgotten. There's a huge lack of access to education, to healthcare, to reproductive healthcare, to mental health care, lack of access when it comes to transportation and jobs. And I mean, in certain parts of my district, I don't even have running water. So there is a huge struggle. There's lots of poverty in my district. And I think the reality is, as we circle down towards the entire southern half of the island, there are lots, there's lots and lots of poverty and struggle there as well. So for me, I am a progressive legislator. I ran on a platform in 2000, and let's get it straight. In 2018, I ran for office against an incumbent. I came up a couple hundred votes shy, and I came back and tried again because, as someone who was born and raised in the district, as a Native woman, I felt that it was important that we were being accurately represented. And I truly believe that representation matters. So I ran again, and I ran on a platform of economic justice, social justice, access to all of these basic things that everyone deserves in life, and the opportunity to uplift every single person in our community, not just those who are privileged. And we've been, for me, I've been a really active voice and a very forceful voice in changing and HULIing the system. And I think at many times it's made a lot of my colleagues very uncomfortable. I've been very transparent and open, and I share a lot of these things on my own social media, regardless if it's something that my colleagues and the current legislature likes. And I think the reality is that that's what people deserve. So I am the first woman, first Native Hawaiian, and first person born and raised in my district to ever represent it in the state house. As I said earlier, representation really matters. And it's a privilege to be in the position that I'm in, and I'm hopeful, and I would be privileged to be able to be reelected, to continue representing my community and my home, because we have to build a better future and a better Hawaii that works for all of us. I rambled, I'm sorry.
No worries, let's go to Michaela for our first question.
Okay, first of all, Representative Kapela, again, thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor to be able to speak with you today and ask you these questions in the first place. My first question is, how have you advocated for your community, and what community projects have you worked on?
Ooh, I love this question. Oh, so many things. I am the vice chair for the House Education Committee. So one of the big things that I've been working on over the last election cycle, not just last election cycle, but last year during legislative session, and as well as this year, is really just access to quality education and ensuring that our teachers are being paid what they rightfully deserve. We're dealing with a lot of different issues when it comes to decompressing the pay scale for teachers so that we can actually pay teachers what the step that they're supposed to be at. There are thousands of teachers in our state that are not being paid. They're being paid about $7,000 to somewhere near $19,000 less than the step that they're supposed to be being paid at. So ensuring that our teachers are being paid more. Another thing that we've really been working on is being open and transparent. I think the reality is that for so long, the legislature has operated behind these closed doors. You have chairs and honestly leadership that if a vote gets too close, in order to protect the body or to protect the members, the bill will be pulled and you just won't see it get a vote. So you never really know where people stand. So we've been very open, and this past week, I actually had the opportunity to chair the resolution hearing for the House Education Committee. And we held a vote on something that really shouldn't be controversial. It was the renaming of McKinley High School. And in order to even get it heard and even considered by the committee members, we had moved it to become, instead of just the renaming of the school, we moved it to become a working group between the DOE and the BOE to have a conversation on renaming all the schools in the state that don't have their historic or their native place name. So that resolution died. And it was really painful to watch it die. As a Native woman, I felt that racism. But I mean, that's where the building currently stands. So one of the things that we've been focusing on is just being more open and transparent and pulling people into the building, which has been difficult during COVID, where the Capitol was closed. So where there was this lack of transparency, it was even worse, honestly. And then beyond that, some of the things that I've been working on in my district, when I'm not working at the legislature, I still teach in the district. I teach at Kona Dance and Performing Arts. And I'm a dance instructor there and a teaching artist. It's one of the ways that I love being able to be around just the youth in our community. And then beyond that, we've been working really heavily on just a number of different issues, from advancing access to healthcare in our Marshallese community in Ocean View, and doing things for Kona High School, and working on CIP projects to bring in a youth mental health outreach center. And we're hoping that it can be something that we bring in throughout the entire district. So it's not just one center, but a number of them, because we know that kids that live in rural communities, and especially during COVID, have really struggled with how to deal with their emotions, how to deal with the isolation, and how do they overcome these things. So it's hard to wrap it into like a 3-minute answer, but lots and lots of different things. And I think as a progressive, one of the big things is that you have to focus on all of the different issues. Oh, I guess I forgot this. And I'll add it in now. This past year, I also began to chair and create the Working Families Caucus. So we've been working on a lot of working families issues, from advocating for a living wage, which is at least $18 an hour. If you're a single parent, it's much more. It's higher. It's closer to about $25 an hour. Advocating for affordable housing, as well as doing things like exempting income tax, exempting unemployment insurance from income tax, as well as advocating for paid sick and family leave. So we have a number of things that we've worked on, and I'm really excited to share that the bill that we still have alive from the Working Families Caucus is House Bill 1507, and it is a bill to make the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a tax credit for low income and working families, to make it permanent and refundable, and it's paid for through capital gains tax. So taxing some of the wealthiest individuals in our state to ensure that we can help uplift some of the families that are struggling.
Thank you. Cindy, our next question.
Well, Jeanne, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your mana'o. I was thinking about my next question to you was about critical issues that have arisen in your district. And you've shared several of them with us just a few minutes ago. How will you represent those issues that could be addressed by the state legislature?
Yeah, I think I was just sharing some of the things that we're doing. I think the reality is that in our district, when I look at my current district, and then when I look at how the district has shifted, it's incredibly impoverished. It's very rural, and there's a lack of access to basically everything. Some of the most basic things that people need in their lives, like water. ʻolai kawai, water is life. And there are people in my community that don't have access to it. And one of the biggest issues is that there are so many of my colleagues that don't recognize or understand the level of poverty that exists in my district. So really bringing that to the forefront, sharing the stories of the community members that are facing these incredible hardships that we know COVID only made even worse, right? We knew that there was a divide. We knew that there were gaps in our system. And now through COVID, it ripped open those gaps and those divides. And people that were suffering, oh my goodness, they are still struggling to survive.
Yes.
So dealing with that and really bringing and being a strong voice for those issues and those individuals. I love statistics, and I know that that's one of the things that moves the legislature, but the reality is that behind those numbers are individuals who have lives. They're trying to survive. They're choosing to use that $20 bill that they're making as a minimum wage worker, making $10.10 an hour, to choose whether or not they're going to feed their children or put gas in their car. And that's the kind of thing that we need to change. So as I said, we've been advocating from the very beginning, when I first got into office, and I'll continue to do this until we get them done, and then we'll advocate for the next thing, is advocating for a living wage of at least $18 an hour, eliminating the tip penalty. Oftentimes, the right and big and small business will call it a tip credit. It's not a credit. It's a credit maybe for the business owner. It's not a credit for the employee whose pay is being taken out of their paycheck anytime they're tipped. So you're getting your pay stripped away from you for doing your job, and that's wrong. So eliminating the tip credit, and then advocating for paid sick and family leave. These are the social infrastructure that people need, that our communities need in order to survive. Our communities are not just roads and bridges and physical infrastructure. They're human beings, and we need to be able to put the representation on those individuals who oftentimes I think get forgotten in the legislature. So really being a voice for that and not backing down. And I think the reality is that we need to build truly affordable housing. When you look at our housing, our state's definition of affordable housing, it's between 80 to 140% AMI. I'm a state legislator. I don't even qualify for our affordable housing. And then we're going to build something that's called workforce housing, which is even higher. And then it justifies it. We have a teacher shortage crisis. We have a doctor shortage crisis. We have a nurse shortage crisis. And the reality is that all of these people there should be workforce, right? But they can't afford to pay for workforce housing. So if some of the people that we had mentioned being able to pay for housing or have affordable housing, if they can't even find houses, there's a teacher that's not in my district, but teaches at Kelikea High School, who may have to move because they can't afford to find a home on the Corner Coast, most of which is being rented out on vacation rentals. So we have to shift our idea of affordable housing, shift that definition in our state, which I actually introduced a resolution this past legislative cycle to have HHFDC look at that, because affordable housing really is 140, not 140. True affordable housing is between like 40 and 60% AMI, and that's way off from what our state is currently doing. So just ensuring that we have teachers that will be able to stay here because they're not being priced out of their home. We have Native Hawaiians that are able to stay here because they're not being priced out of their homeland. And we have to recognize as a state, who are we actually working for? Are we working for the tourist industry, or are we working for Hawaii's people? And it should always be the latter.
Michaela?
I agree.
My next question concerns Native Hawaiian rights. And my question was, how can we best forge a path towards the restoration of illegally occupied lands?
Ooh, this is a great question, and it's very loaded. I think one of the interesting things is that coming up in 2029, 2030, and really we need to begin looking at these conversations now, is the military leases that are going to be up. Pohakaloa is on Hawai'i Island. thousands of acres of Hawaiian land that needs to be restored, needs to be that we need to ensure that Native Hawaiians have access to, and that it's not just being used for the continuation really of militarization and the military industrial complex, which has really led to the colonization and really just the disruption of Native Hawaiian people. Every single Native Hawaiian carries so much historical trauma every single day in our lives, and it comes up in weird ways that we maybe don't even recognize, but it's there. And a lot of it has to do with our history of being colonized. So I think one of the big things is having this conversation of land back and really working on what are those military land leases going to look like, and how are we going to get them back? And that's really, I think, a conversation that our state legislature needs to have, and we're beginning to have it. So this past year, I actually introduced another resolution. It was basically calling for demilitarization and how really nuclear warfare is something that continues to destroy, damage both land and people. Unfortunately, it was deferred because they didn't have enough votes to pass it. It was heard though. And there was a second resolution that I didn't introduce, but it definitely supported, that was about basically the land back conversation and ensuring that people and our communities were being pulled into these conversations. And that just narrowly moved forward. But I think the reality is that there's not a lot of appetite in the legislature, and it's up to every single one of us, legislators who are in the building who believe in demilitarization, legislators, not just legislators, but individuals and community members who feel the burden of and the pain that colonization has caused, to stand together and really ensure that we have not just conversations, but we get our land back. And I think there's a lot of other really bad land bills that have come forward, lots of things on ceded lands, ensuring that, I mean, what was passed out last legislative cycle, House Bill 499, which was horrible, basically extending these 100-year leases on ceded and Hawaiian lands. And it's really disturbing, but I mean, that's kind of where the legislature is. And in order to step away from that, we need better people in office. We need individuals who are not afraid to stand up, even if it's not popular in the building. And we need community members who continue to come forward and stand up and fight for the Hawaii that we know we need.
Thank you. Let's go to
long-winded
Cindy for our next question.
That was great.
Thank you so much,
Sure.
Jeanne, for your mana'o on it's. I'm going to switch a little. I'm going to ask you a question on homeless. Okay. Homelessness remains a problem statewide, including on Hawai'i Island. What would you do to come to grips on this persistent problem?
I think one of the things that we really need to do is address the cost of living here. We need actual affordable housing, not, as we talked about earlier, housing that's 80 to 140% AMI that we know that no local person can afford, and not even many workers can afford. We need to really stop catering to the tourism industry and begin really focusing on Hawaii's people. As I said, I think I was also talking about this earlier, I think it's 70% of the Kona Coast is being rented on a vacation rental platform. The teacher that I was talking about that can't find housing now because they were just kicked out of their rental. They were kicked out by a landowner that lived in Germany. And they kicked this teacher out because they wanted to rent it at a higher rate. And we're seeing that up and down the Kona Coast. The reality is that a foreign investor can buy at 60% higher than any local person can afford. And the housing market is hot. And it's sad that during COVID, of all times, we saw people moving here in, I want to say the hundreds. And it's really, really disappointing when, for me, I worry if I'm ever going to be able to buy a home in Hawaii, where I was born and raised, where I want to raise my children. And so I think the reality is that we need to shift our focus from that and begin really focusing on building truly affordable housing. And then from there, ensuring that we get a grip of vacation rentals so that those aren't being the thing that really is extractive. Because the tourism industry as a whole is incredibly extractive. And I think the other thing is that we need adequate access to healthcare. When you're talking about the houseless population, we need to ensure that people are housing first, right? There's these huge initiatives across the country talking about when someone's houseless, they need a house. They need a place to live. They need a place to be. And then they need access to social services and the social network to get themselves back on their feet. And that's one of the things that on Hawai'i Island, it's so rural that we don't have access to healthcare. In Ocean View, there's no health clinic. So to be an individual that's houseless, doesn't have access to anything, and then doesn't have access to healthcare or the opportunity to get their mental health services, or even have a license or any of the things that you need in order to access the health services. So there's lots of steps that we really need to break down. And I think the best way that we do that is by destigmatizing that these are individuals who are dirty and we need to push them away. These are individuals that need to be embraced because they have been pushed away by society already. And it's our job to help uplift them because we are only as strong as the community that we build. And what kind of community do we want to build? One of compassion and care.
Thank you.
Kapela.
My next question has to do with land use and development. So for you, telescopes, construction sites, and commercial activities in many areas of Hawai'i Island have been carried out in areas zoned as conservation. Do you believe that these special use permits are hindering our capacity to preserve our āina, and why?
I feel like there's lots of parts of this, and I'm going to go with the telescope part first, specifically Mauna Kea. When you look at Mauna Kea, the reality is that Mauna Kea is the most sacred of all sacred land, right? It's the center point for so many, not just Native Hawaiians, but people in the Pacific. And I think the reality is that for far too long, Native people have been pushed aside in their own homeland. And we recognize time and time and time again that all Native people need to be seen, uplifted, heard, and we need to begin to rectify the damage and the historical trauma that's been done. And I think how we do that is by ensuring that there's no more special use permits that are given out for Mauna Kea. There's no more pushing for the developer instead of pushing for the human beings that live in our community. And we see that in so many different bills when it comes to land use. So today we actually heard a resolution on the House floor that I voted no on because, and I was one of 2 no votes, because it talks about ensuring that affordable housing is being built. But the reality is that we know that the affordable housing that's currently being built through our state is not actually affordable, right? That 80 to 140% AMI. Second, this resolution called for the county to push through these permits for the building of these affordable housing developments without any type of environmental impact statement, basically saying that no matter what, we're going to push these, we're going to ram these development friendly things through just so, how do I say it? The actual phrasing of the resolution was talking about with bare minimum health and safety inspections. That was it. And we all know, I mean, we saw what happened in Florida, right? This older building collapsed and killed thousands of people.
Yes.
We don't want that kind of thing, those kinds of things being built. And at the benefit of the developer and at the lack and at the destruction really of our communities. We want affordable housing that's going to be built in a safe, environmentally friendly manner that is actually and truly affordable. Otherwise, it's really just this false hope. And I think for far too long, so many politicians have fed our communities false hope under the guise that it's something good. And it's never something good.
Wonderful.
Did I answer your question?
Okay,
Sorry, there was a pause.
Yes, you did. You did.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if you're finished, but I'm going to jump to another category, Jeanne. It is on water and wastewater. What we would love to know is, how do you feel about private-public partnerships to address our waste issues, both in solid waste and wastewater?
I'm very wary of any type of public-private partnership. And the reality is that oftentimes what we see in some of the different public-private partnerships that we enter into, unless they are heavily vetted, it never benefits our county. It never benefits our communities. It's always something that benefits the private business. So for me, to be very honest, I am very wary of any type of public-private partnership. I recognize that they exist. And I think more than anything, we need to ensure that there is heavy stipulation, that there is always very heavy guidance, guidelines, and oversight of any type of public-private partnership or anything that really relates to our communities, the welfare of our people, and the welfare of our environment, right? Because wastewater and treatments they can heavily impact our environment. And living on an island, we know more than anything that it's a fragile ecosystem and it needs to be protected.
Kapela?
Okay.
So my next question has to do with food security and agriculture. So what would you do to help address areas, aka food deserts, where residents only have access to fast food or convenience store options?
So an organization that I've really enjoyed working with over the last 2 years is the Hawai'i Ulu Co-op. And these cooperatives that really focus on bringing in and building community around food. Last election, and I don't know why I keep wanting to call it an election cycle. It's not an election cycle, it's a legislative session. I feel like that's how my brain operates. But last legislative session, I introduced a bill on food hubs and just ensuring that we can create and uplift and also fund food hubs in our communities. Because one of the things that we saw through COVID is that so many people just don't have access to food. I was one of the individuals standing with the Lions Club and a whole bunch, and Vibrant Hawaii, and some of the different school food distributions to ensure that people just could pick up anything. And it was really difficult and sad, because even though we live on an island, and even though Hawai'i Island itself is known as the breadbasket, what we were giving out was canned foods and peanut butters and no vegetables, no fresh produce. So I think really uplifting and supporting cooperatives like the Hawai'i Ulu Co-op, supporting different things like food hubs across our state to ensure that whether or not the barges come in, that we have access to food. And I think the second part of it is that we really need, one of the things that I've been working on in the legislature is helping my colleagues become more understanding of greenwashing. Right? We need actual regenerative agriculture when it comes to building community, basically food hubs, as well as helping to heal, protect, and preserve our land. Because farming has to be done in a way that's regenerative and restorative to the land in all types of practices, whether it's animals or growing out of your garden. And I think the other part of it is, well, I have something exciting that I want to share with you folks, but I want to talk about shifting to education. So ensuring that our students understand what restorative and regenerative agriculture is, what it looks like, and how do they get involved with it when it comes to their own plates. So working with like the Hawai'i Ulu Co-op to ensure that our DOE is serving local canoe crops and Hawaiian sourced food, which is something that's really exciting. And prior to the pandemic, they actually did that. All DOE schools had these like basically farm to table meals at school. So that was something that we're trying to work on restoring. And then another thing that I wanted to share was Ka'u High School has the Ka'u Dream Project, which is phenomenal. And they, I think, are a shining example of not just school gardens, which we've heard a lot of bills on school gardens this year, and school ag programs, but I think Ka'u Dream is this very exciting turning point for our education system, because it's taught students how to feed their communities. And they have throughout the entire pandemic. They started a garden on their school campus through aquaponics. They're getting credit through the University of Hawaii at Hilo to grow food and to then distribute it through the Na'alehu Resilience Hub or their community center, as well as to students when they're being picked up for their families to take home this food that they're growing. They have fed their entire community thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of food grown in these really eco-friendly, safe ways, and they're getting credit for it in school. They're learning about it. They're learning how to set up these systems. And I think that in order to grow in order to have real food hubs in our communities, we need to grow the next generation of farmers, and we need to teach them how to do it in a way that is actually restorative for both people and our planet, right? Because that's what regenerative agriculture is.
Yes.
It's not just good food. It's not just lots of food. It's good for our
food.
planet, and it's good for our people. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Cindy for our next question.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You touched a little on tourism, Jeanne. I'd like to ask you, and we do know that tourism will continue on our shores regardless. So how can we ensure that the tourism industry is of service to our working families rather than the other way around?
I love this question. Partially because I've really struggled with the tourism industry. And I will say that in the last year, one thing that I will say is that when I first got elected into office, I thought that HTA, the Hawaii Tourism Authority, which is basically an organization designed to market Hawaii, was completely needed to be defunded, just entirely. Hawaii markets itself, and that we don't need to spend more money from our state budget marketing this beautiful place that we know people are going to come to regardless. And one thing I'm really grateful for is that HTA has stepped away a little bit from the marketing and is working on these pathways towards regenerative tourism. And I think that's the key word, right? Is regenerative tourism. If we are going to have tourism at all, it needs to be tourism that is benefiting Hawaii's people, not tourism that is continuously extractive. Is that fully possible? I'm not sure yet. I'm not fully sold, but on tourism in general. But I think the reality is that if we have tourism, it has to be something that benefits our people and this land. And one of the things that I've done is introduce a bill on green fees. Both years that I've been in office, I've done something on green fees, and I'm really, really proud of it. And the reality is that if you go to any other country that's heavily, that has a heavy tourism population, they all have a green fee. And like the Galapagos, it's a very intense green fee. And in order to enter the Galapagos, you have to have an exit ticket. There's no like, I'm going to come here for my mental health and then I'm just going to stay. You're going to come here, you can see it, you're going to pay a lot of money, and then you're going to leave. And I think the reality is that that's how tourism should be, if we're going to have it at all. So I've continued to advocate for a green fee. We have passed things in the legislature that are user fees for some of our state parks. And then this past year, one of the things we did was try to raise the cap so that more and more individuals that come wouldn't have to, as more people put money into the user fees, that the cap for that park wouldn't have to stay at a certain level, and that we could accept more money, which seems a little bit strange, but that's one of the bills that we introduced, and I think it's going to pass this year. But I think the reality is that we need to extend that. So anyone coming to our state has to pay something to help preserve our planet and to help preserve our communities, and also help the economic security of Hawaii's people. Another thing that I think when we talk about tourism, I talked about this earlier, is vacation rentals, right? They are these incredibly extractive things that take away from our housing market. And they also, they bring tourists into communities and areas that are not designed for that kind of heavy traffic. So for me, one of the things that my family is from Ka'avaloa, or for anyone who's watching that doesn't know Captain Cook, when you go to Kealikekua Bay, it's a one-way, And it's a very, very, very tiny like a drive, and there's no turnarounds. But the reality is that there are thousands of tourists that go down there every single day. And there are only 5 original families that live there. The rest are all being rented on vacation rentals. So it's really difficult, and it's very sad to see things like that. So we need to get a hold of that. Yeah, there's lots that we need to do when it comes to tourism and ensuring that it actually works for Hawaii's people and not the other way around. And I think a big part of that is electing better legislators, so that it's not just 1 or 2 voices that are advocating against these bad pieces of legislation, but that there's a block of us, and that we can help build this momentum for change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michaela, our next question.
Well, I think that's a wonderful answer. I just want to say
It is.
and my own family is from Ka'awaloa down to Honanao, and so your answer on that is very meaningful to me, so thank you. My next question has to do with climate change mitigation. My question is, Hawaii's top emitting sector is transportation. What ideas do you have to reduce GHG emissions from this sector?
One of the bills that we introduced was a carbon tax. And I do support a carbon tax. We have to ensure that we're also taking care of some of the most vulnerable residents, right? Who can't afford to get an EV, or can't afford to not drive their $1,000 car that gets them from point A to point B. That's really, really old. I get it. I have one of those. And my family has them. And I recognize that we have community members that struggle. So we also have to, anytime we're going to do something that is like a carbon tax or a gas tax, we need to ensure that we're also protecting some of our most vulnerable neighbors, so that they can continue to rise as well. So that's something that I support. I also support ensuring that, one other thing that we did, I'm trying to think about what I introduced. One of the bills that we were looking at was a bill that would ban or phase out fossil fuel cars. And also something that, one of the ways that we would have to do that is as I said, talking about our most vulnerable neighbors, is that we would have to expand tax credits and incentives to purchase EVs. So you look at some different countries, and they have already begun to phase out. They have a phase out by, I think there's a country that has a phase out by 2025. The bill that we were looking at was 2030. But when we do something like that, we also have to ensure that we're uplifting our vulnerable neighbors and providing a tax credit or some sort of incentive to assist with that. Our state has also, I believe it's any type of government car, it has to be an EV now. So anytime we rent a car or all of our fleets, so like in the county, as well as like I know school buses, and one of the big issues that we've been focusing on, this is not related, and I feel bad for having to talk about this in this answer, but it goes together, is the bus driver shortage. And one of the things with our new bills is that anything that's state or county has to be an EV. So when looking at addressing the bus driver shortage, some of our schools, especially the schools in rural areas, are looking at investing in smaller like electric vans to help pick up students and bring them to school. So that's one of the ways that we're addressing both the climate crisis as well as our school bus driver shortage. And then also we have to begin investing in charging stations. Anytime we're building new housing or new any type of new development, if it is going to be built, it has to have this type of infrastructure built in. So really investing in these just charging stations and that type of infrastructure in our communities, specifically in our rural communities, where if you're going to drive, I mean, it takes me 2 hours to drive from one side of my district to the other. If you are going to drive to it, you want to know that you have a place to charge your car at the end. So really focusing on those things as well. That was very long-winded.
That was great.
It was good though. It was very good.
Thank you.
So we have
Thank
time for
you.
we have time for just a couple more questions.
Okay.
Cindy?
I'm going to circle over to marine conservation, Jeanne. My question to you is, what factors do you see as harming coral reefs, and what should we do about each such factor?
So one of the big things that the legislature did was we passed a bill to ban oxybenzone in sunscreen. And I think that that's a small thing that the legislature has done, but it's also a very big step. And the second thing really, and we talked about tourism already, is over tourism. The reality is that we just have too many tourists in our waters. And we have too many people coming and going. And we know that one of the biggest emitters of carbon are airlines. And the reality is that our coral is dying because we just have too many people here. And our planet is really just so focused on capitalism and growth and production and how we're gonna do X, Y, or Z, that we stop thinking about the thing that is the most important. It's our planet. If we don't have a planet, then we don't have any place to live. And so we need to really focus on stopping and curbing over tourism. And I think the other thing is that I would really like to see implemented is a carrying capacity for our islands. I think that that's something that our state really can do. And it would be a really big step to helping to curb over tourism, because we saw, I know that Kahalua is in my district now, but we saw the shift and the change in that place, in that area. We saw purple coral, and I loved taking my little siblings there and swimming and seeing these things that you never saw for years and years and years. You never saw. And then the 2 years that we didn't have tourists here, the 2 years that we actually that our land had the ability to rest and to be restored, we saw this growth and this change. So I think it's really important that we have conversations about curbing over tourism, and how do we actually manage it.
Mahalo.
Okay,
Very
last
good.
question. Go to Michaela.
Okay, so my last question has to do with infrastructure. My question is, and you kind of talked a little bit about, charging stations. So several current electric vehicle charging stations around the island have been found to be inoperative for long periods of time. So how would you work to help develop an adequate network to keep pace with the demand for more chargers and a means to ensure that they stay maintained and safely accessible?
That's an interesting question. And you honestly bring up things that I day to day don't think about. As someone who doesn't have an EV, unfortunately, yet, as well as someone who focuses a lot of my effort and energy is focused on like broad-based progressive policy and economic justice work, as well as education. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation about EVs and the environment. So you're getting me thinking about how do we create these pathways for change. And as I said, we really need to begin to invest a lot more heavily because the very few charging stations that we do have on the island are overworked and overused. And that's why it's very difficult to keep them up, because we haven't invested in these projects. So I think the reality is that we need to invest more. We need to streamline the problems so that there's this cohesive support network. So when something isn't working, you're not waiting till you go to it and try to charge your car and it's not working, or you see a sign on it. Like, there needs to be something maybe within our county or even within our state that's run in a way that is, I mean, I want to say that's tech savvy and a tech advanced as well. So ensuring that you can go on your phone and open an app that is run through the county or the state that says this charging station is out, and then someone from the county or the state can then go and fix it. And that kind of seems like a no-brainer, but the reality is that when you work in the legislature or in politics, is that common sense is not that common. And every little thing that we do is very difficult. But I think it also goes to show that we really need to invest more heavily in green jobs and creating green jobs that really work to benefit something like this. So these are the things that while our state has this goal of being 100% run on renewable and clean energy by 2045, we don't have the steps in place yet to get there. So having conversations like this, where we really begin to have these conversations on what does the transition to a clean economy look like? And what are all the little steps, big and small, that we need? And what are the jobs that we need in order to create that kind of change? So working with, I think, creating more, it's hard because I know people don't like working groups, but the reality is if we don't have a working group, we'll never get to the step. So creating more spaces where we have these conversations on each island, because every island is different, but also throughout our state. So we have a cohesive plan on how do we address green jobs, climate resiliency, and then access to, well, green jobs that are also good, good paying, but also so that we can access these really necessary steps for change.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mahalo.
Rep, so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. We're building something that Hawaii political establishment has never seen, a slate of Pono candidates. And your donation can help HULI the system. So please visit our website, hulihi.com, HULIHI.com, for more information, and click on the donate button. We'd really appreciate any amount of money that you can donate so that we can keep these interviews going. Thank you so much to Rep Kapela, our interviewers, and good luck on your campaign.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and to everyone out there, thank you very much for watching. I think that getting involved in the process starts in spaces like this, and then just continuously showing up. We need every single one of you to help make the change that we deserve and the Hawaii that we deserve. So thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mahalo nui loa. Yeah.